My name's Ben. I've been part of the church here at Abbey for, nearly like 20 years now. And part of churches in general for a long time in my life. Also, I'm thinking right this second about changing what I'm about to say right now. I don't know if I will, but I'm just naming that I'm wondering that. I'm buying myself some time in case I ramble a bit. Anyway, yes, I'm just a member of the church here. I've been a member of various churches for most of my life, nearly 40 years. And there's several things, but one thing that I think is a appropriate, important even, part of our communication with God that I don't see happen very often in church. There are several things like this, that things that you think are a good part of communicating together as God's family and with God that don't happen in church that often. So I'm going to do one of them. And probably, because it's me and I'm wearing a pink jumper, you're going to think I'm joking. But I promise I'm not joking. This is serious. Also, I need to work out where I can go that's far away from a mic. If I put this down here, does that work?
How long, Lord, must we call for help, but you don't listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you don't save? Why do you make us look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before us. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. How long, Lord, must we call for help, but you don't listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you don't save? Why do you make us look at injustice?
Apologies. Not apologies. Apologies if that startled you. Not apologies for the thing. Apologies that I lost half my voice. Not apologies for the thing. I think it is good and appropriate and important to cry out to God, but I don't think we do it very often. Anyway, seeing as we're talking about unanswered prayer, I thought that felt like maybe a good time to give it a whirl. What am I talking about? I think we all know that unanswered prayer happens, right? I think we can find lots of ways of trying to soften that or tell ourselves, to reassure ourselves with the nice examples, or to find ways of being like, technically that was answered, it was just answered as a no. We know what we're talking about when we say this stuff. When we talk about unanswered prayer, we know that we mean those heartfelt cries of individuals, as the church as a collective, of whole nations, that by every measure you can possibly think of seem more than reasonable, from the heart, surely in line with the heart of God, where there would be such an easy intervention, such an easy change. We're not talking here about, I wish I had a parking space at Tesco, or please make me be on time even though I left late, or whatever. We're talking about the pregnant woman who prays for the safe arrival of her baby and it doesn't make it. We're talking about the person who their whole life long pours their heart into hoping for inclusion and welcome and acceptance, and they keep finding themselves left on the outside. We are talking about people who lament the church's part in their abuse or in the abuse of people they know, in systematic abuse. We are talking about thousands upon thousands of people in Ukraine on their knees pleading for their lives and for safety and for justice. And those things don't come, right? Not always. Sure, they do sometimes, but we know there is no shortage of times where those things don't come. And how can that be? It makes no sense to us, right? That's the stuff we're talking about. And let's just make sure we're being honest up front. I got about 15 minutes left to tell you why that's fine. A few years ago, I was listening to a podcast series of lectures from the University of Oxford on philosophy, because that's the sort of thing I like to do for fun. And one of them was on solipsism. Doesn't really matter what, don't worry about the big word. Solipsism is sometimes called the brain in a jar problem, and it's this famously difficult idea in philosophy that how do you ever know that you are really here, that you are all really here, that there's more than just yourself, and that I'm not just a brain in a jar somewhere being fed electrical signals to tell me that all of this is here, right? How do I ever know that I'm saying things now, that you're hearing things now, that the sun is shining now, that this building even exists? How do you know that for sure? And I was like, yeah, that is, I don't know. I don't know. How do you know that? And I was really excited to find this series because the head of the philosophy department at the University of Oxford was going to come and do a 50-minute talk on the problem of solipsism, the brain in a jar thing. And I was like, yes, this is going to be great. Like, I don't have time to do years and years of philosophical study, but he has. He's the head of the Department of Philosophy at the University of Oxford, and he's doing a 50-minute lecture on this thing. This is definitely going to bottom it out for me. And within about 2 minutes of starting the lecture, he goes, yeah, you can't ever know that. There is no answer. There is no proof. There is no philosophical wrangling that you can do that is not subject to the same problem, right? Because how do you know it's not your brain in a jar being given the information that makes that philosophy? There is no way through that. But what you have to do, and the reasonable philosophical response to that, and your job as students of it, is figure out the best way to proceed on the basis of as if this is real, right? You will never know if the world really exists. You will never know for sure if this building is actually here, if the sun is actually shining, if you're actually talking to other people. You'll never philosophically know that for certain. But so the best thing to do is just to proceed as if it is. Proceed, how best do I proceed knowing that this uncertainty will always be there? Sure, I will never have an answer to is this building actually there, but that doesn't need to stop me being able to make choices and decisions and steps forward that seem meaningful on the basis that it is. Does that make sense? And I was sort of really annoyed because I wanted the answer to solipsism, but I was sort of really pleased as well with that honesty, and that helps. And I think unanswered prayer is the same, right? I think it just will always be dishonest if somebody tries to give you an easy answer to those things. If somebody says, oh, it's just this, I figured it out, I can wrap it up in a nice little bow, here's why, here's the pattern, and here it is figured out and bottomed out for you. That was easy, wasn't it? I don't think that can possibly be true. And that is partly because I've lived a fairly long time, I've been in church a long time, I've read quite a lot of stuff, I've heard quite a lot of stuff, and none of the answers I've ever seen or heard have ever been good, basically. They always either have glaring holes in them or they do more harm than good. So I'm never satisfied with when people have pretended that they have an answer to it. But also, I don't think it takes much imagination to realize we don't want there to be an answer like that, right? As soon as you start to think about the unfathomable complexity of all the things that are going on in a world full of answers, questions, askings for prayer, it's so impossible. Like the idea that me, like 4-year-old normal dude Ben in Bristol, would be able to understand an answer that accounted for all of that stuff in a way that made sense. I don't want it to be possible. I don't want to think that something that mind-boggling would be small enough to fit in my mind. So I say all of that just to say, please beware of people who come bringing easy answers. I don't think they exist. I think the best we can do is try and work out how to best proceed without having an answer, without having an understanding, without ever being able to turn around and tell your friend, yeah, I know it looks messed up that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are pleading for an end to war, and yet it just keeps getting worse. Right? You're never going to have but it's fine, because God, ... The best we can do is, how do we best proceed knowing that we won't have that full understanding? So, I want to just say quickly 2 ways that I think people try and proceed quite commonly that I really hate. This is basically just a rant now. Sorry, not sorry. 2 ways that I really don't want us collectively to proceed. And one way that I think maybe is about the best we can do. It's the best I've figured out so far. So let me see. Can I remember which one I put first, Chris? I think first let's talk about fatalism, or in more simple language, this doesn't matter, right? That's one possible response. Okay, so people can pour their heart and soul into praying for things that surely would be in line with the heart of God. They fast, they pray together, they do prayer walks. I don't know, there's people who've served in the church their whole life long, and they pray and they pray and they pray, and even then, even something minor doesn't arrive. The prayer goes unanswered. I think it's an easy response to go, well, it just doesn't matter then, does it? Right? It's just arbitrary. God's going to do, I mean, you can dress it up in theological language, you know, God is fully sovereign. God's going to do what God's going to do. It's out of our hands. It doesn't matter. My part doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter whether I pray or not. It doesn't matter how I respond to these situations. Yeah, que sera, sera. Right? I think I can understand why people get to that place. But I don't like it. Basically, I don't think it's a good way to proceed. Maybe this is where I say the bit that was a bit different. I think lots of stuff in church wants to go towards our personal closure, right? The resolve for us individually, things getting nice and on a sort of even keel and a feel-good thing for us each as individuals, right? You know, you want the song to come round to that note that it started on and have that like, okay, now this is the end. You know, we want to be able to say the little prayer at the end of the service, amen, good, okay, everything's like as it should be. Now we go out and carry on with our lives. You raise a difficult subject, but then you give people a nice, tidy answer. You know, everything is sort of oriented around how am I going to get back to feeling at least a 7, ideally an 8 or 9 out of 10. Right? And that's what church is for. And sometimes you'll hear people expressly talk about it in those terms. You should come to church because, you know, I was down at like a 3 or a 4 and I went to church and it took me to like a 7 or an 8 out of 10. It's great. It was great benefits. I don't think that's what church is for. I don't think that's what following God is about. And I think with unanswered prayer, same thing. I long for there to be more things, especially with prayer, that instead of tending towards personal closure, satisfaction, and feel good, lead towards collective dissatisfaction and unresolve and frustration and up in the air and suspense. You know, the song doesn't quite come back down to where it started from. The feeling maybe goes back down to a 3. But, you know, things that this is not about me personally going away feeling nice. It's about us together feeling suitably troubled. Because I think some powerful things happen when we together are troubled. And I feel like it gives us a more honest engagement with the world. I'll come back to that at the end. I just want to name that, though. I want part of our answer to this to be to not go towards an answer to bring us personal closure, but to sit together and name the dissatisfaction and the frustration. And I think that, doesn't matter, God's going to do what God's going to do. Why bother? Can be a way of us getting to personal closure instead of collective dissatisfaction, right? I don't need to worry about that anymore because God's going to do whatever. So it doesn't I shouldn't even bother praying in the first place. Hey, if I never pray for the thing in the first place, I can't be disappointed with God when it doesn't come through. So in a way, I'm being more faithful. None of that. I really don't like this idea of it just doesn't matter. The second way, oh man, I don't have time to do all the rant I want to do on this. This would be a 6-hour-long rant. The second thing I really don't like as a way to proceed in the absence of certainty is, if only. You just needed to, you know. Sometimes I call it the control mechanism. This idea that we had control over the outcome, we just pushed the buttons wrong, right? There would be peace in Ukraine if only more people had fasted. Your broken leg would have been miraculously healed if only you'd closed your eyes and clasped your hands when you asked for it. Your financial strife would have been alleviated if only, you had, I don't know, whatever it is. People fill in those gaps with all sorts of nonsense, right? We just grab for whatever feels near at hand that seems sort of pious and holy. And we basically give people the impression that it's a failure on our part, that we screwed up the little prayer ritual, that we didn't put the right things in the witch's cauldron to make the right potion. And I hate I hate that. Come and talk to me afterwards if you want to hear the whole rant. Don't, because you'll be here for 6 hours. But yeah, do you know what I mean? This idea of God is always going to want to do the right thing, so it must be our screw up when that doesn't happen. There's all sorts of toxic and dangerous things down that line. But let's talk a little bit about what I do think we should do, because maybe that's a bit more positive. Okay, so we can never have certainty about why prayers that surely should be answered go unanswered. How do we best proceed in light of that unarguable reality? The best thing I've found so far, or one thing that I feel confident is a decent way to proceed, is to try saying or shouting, like I did, all of it. What I might call like a second order prayer. And you can see that in the prayer from Habakkuk that I read at the start. So that's Habakkuk 1. I'm just going to read it again. Don't worry, I'm not going to shout at you again. Hear, as I read this, all the prayers that went before it. Right? This is at least a round 2 prayer from Habakkuk. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. How long, Lord, must I call for help? Habakkuk has been calling for help. Habakkuk has been praying for help, has been crying out violence. Lord, save me from violence. Save us from violence. It hasn't been happening. This is the second order prayer where Habakkuk recycles the feeling that produces into a prayer of its own. I've been praying for help. I've been praying for salvation from violence. They haven't arrived. So now my prayer is why? Now my prayer is how long? Now my prayer is what are you doing? And I think that is the best way I've found to proceed, is to make the frustration, the lament that Esther was talking about earlier, to recycle all of that straight back into the prayerful conversation with God as well, right? And then you can do a third order prayer. Maybe Habakkuk spends months and months praying, what are you doing? How long will it take? Where have you gone? Why don't you save me? And then maybe the feeling is, I think this is useless. I don't know if you're there. I'm going to go do something else. Turn those into a prayer as well. God, I feel like this is useless. I feel like you're not there. I feel like I need to change everything, whatever it might be. Doesn't matter how many layers deep you go, keep recycling all of those honest reactions straight back into the conversation with God. It's still not going to bring you nice, neat, personal, individualized closure. I know you want it. I want it too. I want it to have an 8 out of 10 day carry on and be nice at the end of it. It might not do that. It might mean that our whole lives are spent in collective dissatisfaction and unrest. Oh, do you know, I nearly said then, that's okay. I don't want to say that's okay, because that's okay is a statement of you're going to be back at 8 out of 10 personal closure. Staying in the unrest and the dissatisfaction. That's the end of the sentence. It might be that what happens is you stay in the unrest and the dissatisfaction. It might be that what happens is you stay in the unrest and the dissatisfaction. I'm going to finish by just encouraging us to have a little practice of that. I won't make us do it all out loud together because that's complicated. But I would really like for these to be the sorts of things that happen more together somehow. But I'll ask you to do it on your own now for logistical ease. And then maybe we can work towards it together over time. What I want you to do is just take a minute to think of an unanswered prayer for you. A thing that you have longed for, a thing that your heart cries out for. Could be for you. I don't care how nonsensical it is, right? If your honest, unanswered prayer is, God, give me a Ferrari, and you haven't got one yet, use that. If your honest, unanswered prayer is, God, find a way to justice and peace in the Middle East, use that. Anywhere on the spectrum in between. Just think, what is an unanswered prayer for you? In fact, take 30 seconds to do that now. Okay, and now think honestly. If this is uncomfortable to do now, you can do it at home later. But the next step, I suppose, would be to think honestly and vulnerably for yourself. What is the feeling for you now that goes with the fact that that prayer is unanswered? So think what it was. And then how do you honestly... God knows it already. You don't need to hide this stuff. What is your feeling about the lack of answer to that prayer? You could be furious. You could be sad. You could feel small and hopeless. You could feel righteous indignation. But just what is that feeling for you? And then, because I said I wouldn't force you to do it right now, if it helps, because we're British and shy, as a church collectively, because social tendencies are not generally geared towards being really out there with your feelings, if it helps, Think of a song or a piece of music or, I don't know. For me, it's quite often a rap that fits with that feeling for you. Because that can help to get us over our embarrassment about doing things like shouting. When you get home, when there's an apt moment to do it, take that piece of music, crank it up real loud or real quiet, depending on what fits your feeling, and name those feelings candidly to God. God already knows, but name it as loud as it needs to be. This is where my dissatisfaction is at with the fact that this prayer has not been answered. I'm going to stop talking at that point. I'm going to try and resist the temptation to give a nice, neat little bow end on it. I long for us to have more collective dissatisfaction. It's okay. No, I did it again. Take it with us now. I'm going to do it the same. Think again about your unanswered prayer and hold that feeling of dissatisfaction around it.